Alright, how's it going, Neil? So today, this is a tutorial I made a while ago, and I've been planning on remaking this for a long time because a ton has changed. And that is going to be how to set up an OpenVPN server on your Synology NAS. And this is a huge tutorial because it allows you secure access to your NAS from wherever you are in the world. If an OpenVPN server gets hacked, there are a lot bigger problems in the world. And so it's a great way to open yourself up to the internet while also being very secure. So you can access all of your features on your NAS and even on your local network, but you are in a very protected VPN tunnel coming straight back to the NAS. So you are adding a second layer of security versus opening up the services directly to the internet themselves. So having a VPN server and using a VPN can allow you to completely disable Quick Connect and all open ports on your router except for one, the OpenVPN port you choose. Now, what this does restrict you to being able to do is it means that nobody else can access your NAS from outside of your network except people you give a OpenVPN profile to. So if you want to be able to share photos with families, unless you get every single one of your family members on the VPN, which is not really going to happen, you are just really not going to be able to. But for businesses who are looking for a very secure way of having files handled, this is an easy place to start. And it has gotten a lot better than when I previously did it because now there's a great client for Mac, Windows, and Linux, and iOS and Android. Pretty much everything you possibly need. And it has also gotten a couple security updates that are very important to enable, just so your server does not get bogged down. All right, so before we start this video, I need to talk about the difference between a VPN server and like a VPN like NordVPN. This is not meant so that you can hide your traffic from your ISP or torrent or anything like that. No, what this VPN does is it allows you secure access to your local network from wherever you are in the world, and even act like you are in that location from wherever you are in the world. So if you wanted to, and you were in a place that was blocking specific traffic, you could hook up to this VPN and actually set it so all the traffic went through your home network. So if you wanted to act like you were at home to your Netflix account, you could do that here, but it's not going to hide your internet traffic from your ISP because it's going to look like all of your traffic is coming directly out of your home network, even though you may be in a different part of the world. That being said, there's an optional configuration where you can only send local traffic or all traffic. And I will show that when we get to that part. But I did want to add that because people are always asking, my public IP address did not change when I connected to this. It's because you just connected locally. But first, let's take a moment to thank the sponsor of today's video, Southern New Hampshire University. One of the biggest things I have learned from starting a consulting business is the importance of experience. If you feel like experience is holding you back from the career you want, then I'm excited to tell you about Southern New Hampshire University. SNHU has one of the largest accredited nonprofit online degree offerings in the country. And today we're going to be talking about their online degree in computer science. In this program, you will learn the skills you need to join one of the nation's fastest growing career fields. You will also learn popular programming languages such as Python, Java, and C++. You will also learn agile software methodologies and develop a security mindset, which is crucial for the current industry environment. SNHU also provides cloud-based virtual environments for some courses, which allows you to get access to the technology you will need for your degree, as well as for your career. SNHU is also radically affordable. Their online tuition rates are some of the lowest in the country. Go to snhu.edu/spacerex or click the link in the description to find out more information about the average annual salary for a computer scientist and request free information about the program. It only takes one click to find your calling. All right, thanks to SNHU for sponsoring that section of the video. Back to the tutorial. All right, so now there is one additional caveat. You do require the ability to port forward on your router where the NAS is located. And there are two big drawbacks to this because some people are not going to be able to. So first off, if you are outside the US, it's a lot more common outside the US, or if you have a service such as Starlink, more newer ISPs that have not been around as long, do not give you a public IP address. What they give you is a shared public IP address using a process called carrier grade NAT or CGNAT. What this means is you're unable to open up ports on your router. This means that you're not going to be able to use this because it requires port forwarding to be done on your router. I do have a video on how to set up Tailscale for this exact way. So if you do not have the ability for port forwarding, you can use Tailscale still as a third-party VPN, which does not require port forwarding. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. Also, if you have two routers on your network, this can have a similar effect. So you may have your ISP's router, and then you bought another router such as like a mesh setup and just plugged it directly into that. those are two different routers, which means you actually need to log into both of them and do the port forwarding. So you'd have to forward from the first router to the second router and the second router to the NAS. Those are just the two caveats there. If you've not set the first router up, the ISP's router up in pass-through mode, some routers cannot be done there. So if you do have two routers on your system, that is what you have to do. It's not too big of a deal. You just need to forward the ports twice and it will continue on working fine. All right, so now let's go ahead and start setting this up. And all we need to do is go ahead and log into DSM right here. And we can go ahead and just install the package through the package center right here. All we need to do is search VPN and install the VPN server. All right, so now once this is installed, we can just go ahead and hit open on it and we can start setting some things up. So the first thing we're gonna wanna do is we're gonna wanna go into general settings and make sure that your network interface matches what is actually in use. So for me, I've got the 10 gig card added into this. So I'm on LAN 3 and you can see this is actually my local IP address. So I'm gonna wanna be using this one. If you have multiple LAN ports, choose the one that's actually used for the network you want to be able to share with people. And then if you have a domain controller, so if this is a business and you've got people using Windows domain or a LDAP, you can go ahead and actually choose if you have local users or domain users, though you cannot do both. And finally, you have the option for who you want to grant VPN permissions to. For most people, everybody gets VPN permissions, just because if you want them to have access to the NAS, you probably want them to have access to the NAS, but that is going to be up to you. And it can further be controlled right here by selecting who has access on the VPN. So we can just say, only Will has access to OpenVPN and that's it. But that's all up to you. I would not worry too much about that for most people, just because they also require their certificate file, and you probably want people to have access to the OpenVPN server if you're giving them access to the NAS. So now we just need to come in here and enable the OpenVPN server. And we'll see that we've got a few options right here. First off, the dynamic IP address. This right here is going to be the IP addresses your clients get when they connect to the VPN server. And so I would highly recommend leaving this at 10.8.0.1 as this is what we will be using for this tutorial. If you do have that subnet in use, you can set it to whatever, but very few people are likely to have that subnet in use. There's about 65,000 other options, so you're very unlikely to have this actually in use. But if you do, that'd be the one thing, though you probably do not. And so right here, this 10.8.0.1 is going to be the IP address of the Synology on the VPN server. So that means that even if we've got a weird networking configuration I'm going to talk about later, clients always can use 10.8.0.1 to connect into the NAS from their VPN setup. And so that's what I'm going to be setting up here and recommending to most people because it keeps it super simple. We can also say how many people want to connect, 15. And now for port, let's just bash in a random 4-digit number. And that is going to be the port you use. I always just set it randomly. OpenVPN is very secure, but it just is easier to have a random port. That way you don't even see logs of people just like guessing and unnecessarily. It is just one of those things that's like, may as well do it. And as long as it's not in use by anything else, you're going to be fine. The rest of this, you are going to want to leave as the default unless you have a specific thing you are looking for. Now, we've got these additional options right here. And for most people, what I would recommend is allowing clients access to the server LAN. So this means that a client on the VPN would be able to not just talk to the NAS, but maybe another NAS on the same local network, or maybe a computer and be able to remote desktop into it, things like that. And then if you're setting this up for the first time, I would highly recommend verifying the TLS auth key. That just reduces spam down into your network where people are just trying to connect to VPN servers. Even though there's a massive encryption key that they're not going to be able to brute force, there's basically just bots out there spamming it to see what can happen. So verifying the TLS auth key can fix that. Though note, if you do actually set this, and you've already previously set up and exported configurations with it disabled, you will need to re-export those configurations for people and send them back out. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Then finally, I generally do not verify the server's common name just because that requires you to have a properly signed SSL certificate. And to have a properly signed SSL certificate, you need to use Let's Encrypt and then also be able to have port 80 open. And so it's just much easier not to have it and just have it be self-signed, because that way you can set this up way easier and have less ports open overall. And you don't have a weird update to your certificate that all of a sudden now breaks your VPN connection, which can be a huge pain. Technically, verifying the server's common name is a little bit more secure so that there can't be a complete man-in-the-middle attack who is essentially emulating your VPN and actually has your VPN parameters in there. I don't know how that would really happen, but technically verifying the server's common name would do that. But for all intents and purposes, leave that one unchecked unless you really know what you're doing and really have a specific reason to. And that's pretty much it. Now, we just need to make sure we know this port, and we're going to go ahead and hit apply. Now, it's going to tell us we need to open up this port on our router and on our firewall. So if you've not set up a firewall, you can skip the step right here. But if you have set up a firewall, all you need to do is come into your firewall and just give access to that. You can just come into your firewall, and we'll just enable it and just show you it really quick. First, what you're going to want to do is hit create and allow anybody into the VPN server. So just scroll down until you see that VPN and click OK. And that's from any IP address. That's because you want anybody on the internet to be able to initiate the VPN handshake. If you're super restrictive, you can also just say just US, but honestly, you're using a VPN server. You're good. Nobody's brute forcing their way into this, almost certainly. So I would not worry about that. I would just set it to all. And now we just need to go ahead and say anybody who's on the VPN subnet, 10.8.0.0, 255.255.255.0, is allowed to do anything on the NAS. So these would just be the two allow rules that you would need to add in if you had a more complex firewall already set up. So you can add those in and make sure. But if your firewall is disabled, there is no reason to. The first one allows the VPN traffic into the NAS so it can actually do it. And then the second one actually allows your NAS to actually communicate and work with people who are on this VPN network. Now, the next part is the most complicated because there's 5 billion different types of routers out there. What you now need to do is figure out how to do port forwarding on your router. The easiest thing to do is figure out the name of your router and then just Google that port forwarding. There are going to be a few caveats here. First off, if you have two routers, so a lot of people have their ISP's router and then their own like TP-Link mesh network. If those are both acting as routers and you've not set up the ISP's router in pass-through mode, you're going to have to do port forwarding twice. First from the ISP's router into your second router, and then from your second router into the Synology. So essentially what port forwarding does is it allows a connection from the internet into a specific device. So in this case, when something from the internet requests port 7854 from the IP address of our router, it will be forwarded onto the actual Synology so that it can actually connect to the VPN. And so what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to essentially first start by giving the Synology a static IP address, a DHCP reservation in the router. That way, every single time the Synology connects, it's given the same local IP address. In my case, I can go in here and go into LAN 3, and I can see that I want to give it the IP address 10.30.0.106 because that's already what it's on. This is not required in all routers. Some of them will automatically do that. Then step 2 is actually forwarding the port. For me, it is going to be 7854 UDP to the IP address of the Synology, 10.30.0.106. You will have a few options. You may have an internal, external, set those both as 7854 or whatever port you choose. And you will also need to go ahead and make sure that it is UDP. I'm going to go ahead and show it on my router really quick. So now I've come into Unify. I'll leave a link to my Unify tutorial on this. What we just need to do is set it up. Basically, we're going to say from any port, from any IP address to port 7854. Both the external port and the internal port will be the same. Will be forwarded to the IP address of our NAS, 10.30.0.106, which is right here. And protocol UDP. This is by far going to be the hardest thing to do, and it can be tough. It's kind of confusing. Port forwarding is tough. If you want to hire me, there's a link for that, but just search the type of your router and port forwarding and you should be able to figure it out. Only open up this single port. All right, and now we just hit apply changes, and now we should be good. All right, so now we are pretty much done except for 2 additional steps. First, we need a way to figure out where our house's IP address is. Most home users have a variable IP address, basically a non-static IP address. That means every few weeks or every few years, your ISP may give you a different public IP address. You don't want to have to change your certificate every single time that happens. So instead, what you want it to do is every time that happens, it just updates by a name. So that is called DDNS. So Synology has a free built-in DDNS that we can just come into external access, DDNS, and just hit add. You are going to select your service provider as Synology, or if you've got any other ones, you can choose that. And we will call it DS1522 demo, whatever you would like it to be. Now what this will do is it will automatically set your public IP address to this. So if you looked up a DNS address for ds1522demo.synology.me, you would get given this fake public IP address that's not actually my public IP address. So that is what you would do. And so that way you can always connect back to your home's network, because anytime this external IP address updates, this host name ds1522demo.synology.me will update with it as well. So they stay in sync. So now we'll just hit OK. So now that's done. We can now go ahead and export our VPN configuration by coming back into VPN Server and hitting Export Configuration. And now we can go ahead and edit this Word document. You'll see it's gone into my Downloads folder. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to right-click on it and open it with a text editor. So now, the only thing that's required for everybody to change is this line number 3 right here. We're just going to change that to ds1522demo synology.me. Whatever you set up in the last step as your DDNS, put in right here. That way, the OpenVPN server always knows how to connect to your router. Then there's a bunch of useful options in here, so you can really tinker with it later on. But the most useful one that actually I would recommend people look at is this line right here, redirect gateway. You can see it's got a pound in front of it, which means it's commented out, i.e. not read. What this does is this has the option, if it's commented, only traffic to your local network, i.e. going to a NAS or a computer on the local network, will actually be sent through the VPN tunnel. That means that if you are an employer and you've got 15 employees connecting the VPN server and they're on YouTube, their YouTube at home is not going to be routed through your office's internet, really saving on bandwidth. The only thing that will be actually sent through the VPN tunnel will actually be traffic destined for the NAS. So for most offices, I would really recommend leaving that commented because you don't want all your traffic going through there. However, if you are looking to be able to go out of country and still log into your Netflix as if you're at home, you can actually uncomment that by deleting the pound. And now all of your traffic will look like it's coming out of your home's IP address. So that is the most useful one there. Now, all we need to do is download the OpenVPN Connect for whatever computer you're on. You can just Google OpenVPN Connect, and they've got it for Windows, Mac OS, whatever, and it is free. So go ahead and download that, and I'm just going to go ahead and open it up right now. And basically, open up this file, and it's automatically going to load in. Or just drag it directly into the app. So right here, we just need to go ahead and enter our username and password. This is the username and password for the Synology NAS. And now I'm going to take myself off of Wi-Fi and instead connect to my phone. Basically, this is just going to connect me into my phone's hotspot. And so that way I'm not on my local network, and hit connect. The first time you connect, you will see this missing external certificate. Just say don't show again and hit continue. And now this is painfully slow because my phone's hotspot is quite slow, but we should go ahead and get a connection in a second here. And just like that, we are now connected on in. So now let's talk about how we can access our files anytime. So we're going to be using SMB for this. So on macOS Finder, hit Command K once you've opened up Finder, or hit Go, connect to server. And now type in SMB : And to work no matter where you are, this is what I tell people to do who may have a weird networking configuration, where essentially the coffee shop's IP address and your home's IP address have the exact same subnet. If that's the case, you can always use 10.8.0.1 and hit connect. And the reason this works is this is the IP address of the Synology on the VPN. And so you can see just like that, I was able to connect to demo, which is that SMB share. In Windows, you do the exact same thing. You open up Windows File Explorer, and in the file path, just type / 10.8.0.1 and hit enter. And then, if prompted, put in your username and password. So that will work wherever you are with whatever network you are. So if you are an employer and you just want people to be able to access it at the same time every single time, that's generally what I set up for people just because it's rock solid steady and just tends to work. Now, you're probably used to just seeing it show up in the sidebar over here under network. So you'll notice that it's not going to show up there anymore. That's because this is a layer 3 connection. So those connections that you just see on your network sidebar automatically is what's called a layer 2 connection. And so that only works when you're in the same local area network or have DNS multicast, a bunch of stuff. So those only work when you're on the local connection. Instead, you need to use the IP address. And so that's what you really want to get used to there. If your home's IP address is not 192.168.1 or is also not 10.0.0.0, if you've got something custom there, whenever I set up a router, I always set it up with like 10.80.30. something, just so this never happens. If you have that case, you can always also use the IP address of the NAS on the local area network. So for mine, it was 10.30.0.106, which is the IP of the local network. And now I just type in my username and password. And just like that, I am now connected back in. And the reason that works is on my hotspot, I'm not getting a local IP address that's 10.30. If I did get a 10.30, it would conflict with my home's IP address of 10.30. So because it's not the case, it's not conflicting, I can still use all the IP addresses that are on the local IP network. Though if you have a very common one like 192.168.1, I would really recommend all of your employees get just used to using 10.8.0.1 because that will always work. The only downside is if you have something like a remote desktop that you want them to be able to connect to, or a Windows machine or whatever, then they are going to have to use a local IP address. And so you may run into an issue there. All right, and so now before we close, I do want to mention there's a couple of things you can do to kind of change this out. One, I'm going to leave a link to my forum posts that goes over actually a way that you can kind of jankily, but it works, still use that ds1522.local. I'll leave a link to that. And it's for people who are a little bit more computer savvy, a little bit tech savvy, and are fine debugging this kind of stuff. And then another one is, say this laptop is going to be always connected to this VPN server at a friend's house, and I always want to be able to connect to it. Well, when I'm home, I can't see that IP address exists. I don't know where to find that 10.8.0.2, whatever this was assigned IP address. So what you need to do is log into your router and set up a static route. So you just essentially tell the router, hey, I've got a VPN server over there. It's on the IP address of 10.30.0.106. That's the IP address on the local network of my Synology. And behind it is the subnet 10.8.0.0/24. I just wanted to mention that. Look up static route for your router and be able to do that for people who are looking at the configuration. Few people will actually do that. Most people will only be connecting into the network and not trying to access stuff that's on the VPN server from the local network. I just want to include that for full thing. Also, I do consulting. So if you want me to set this up for you or your business, go ahead and check out the link in the description for that. And if you have any other questions, put them in the comments below or on forums.spacerex.co. All right, have a good one. Bye.